As my patrons know, every month I do a special live stream Q&A where I sit down with them and answer any questions they might have. And last month, one of the Michaels asked about the game Werewolf, linking to a video he had seen a while back and asking if it was true that the game proved that, quote, an uninformed majority will always lose a battle of information against an informed minority. He apologized for not asking a better question, but in fact, that question is my favorite kind. It's the kind that sends me into a research frenzy where I learn some really interesting things that I never would have thought to look into before. I'll also admit that I like the question because I like games, including Werewolf, and I love the reality TV show called Traitors. That show has been around for a few years now. There are different versions in different countries, starting with the Netherlands. But the US version is now on its third season, I think. And literally the only reason why I started watching it is because it's hosted by Alan Cumming and his outfits and his adorable rescue dog, Lala. I mean, look at this. But I kept watching as soon as I realized that it was just a new take on the game Werewolf, which itself is a reskinned version of a game called Mafia. If you aren't familiar with any of these games, allow me to describe for you the simplest version. Let's say you have a group of 11 people. One person is chosen to be the all-knowing moderator or narrator. They hand each of the 10 remaining players a card. 8 of the cards say villager on them, and 2 cards say mafioso. The game begins at night when everyone closes their eyes. The moderator instructs the mafiosos to open their eyes and acknowledge one another. The 2 then silently choose a villager to kill. They close their eyes as the moderator announces that the sun has come up. Everyone opens their eyes, and the moderator reveals who was killed. The remaining players then discuss who they think the mafiosos are. When the moderator announces that the sun is setting, the players vote for one person to kill. The remaining players then close their eyes. The game continues with the mafiosos making their next kill. The game ends when either the villagers successfully kill both mafiosos or the mafiosos manage to kill all but 2 villagers, at which point there would be no way for the villagers to vote to have them killed. And that's the basic gameplay, though in Werewolf, you have villagers and werewolves instead of mafiosos, and you can also play with a detective or seer who's able to get additional information, or a little girl who can keep her eyes open to witness the killers at night, or a medic who can protect one player each day, and on and on and on. But the central premise does always remain an uninformed majority versus an informed minority. So back to Michael's initial question, was the video he saw true? Does the informed minority always win in this game and maybe in life as well? I'm going to play a clip of the video now, and I'm going to give you a content warning for this incoming jump scare. The person who makes the claim is, in fact, Graham Linehan, the TV writer who was rich and successful and had a family, but he gave it all up to hate trans people. Literally, he got so obsessed with hating trans people that his wife divorced him, and now it's just all he talks about. Trans people.
The werewolves win the game if they kill all but 2 villagers. The game was invented by a student of sociology in Russia who wanted to prove his thesis that an uninformed majority will always lose a battle of information against an informed minority.
Wow.
Yeah. And the werewolves usually win. Even if you have 12 people around the table, the werewolves will usually... I once won by turning in the other werewolf.
I mean, you are in show business, Graham. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, that's clever. You turned on the other werewolf.
Yeah. And we won.
Wow.
So that just shows when you have hidden information,
Yeah.
you can completely manipulate a large group of people. That's happening in the NHS. It's happening in publishing. It's happening in every middle class industry because there's always 1 or 2 or 3 people who think they themselves are non-binary, have a kid who's told them they're non-binary, or whatever it happens to be. And those people are controlling the conversation.
So yeah, here Linehan brings up werewolf because in his mind, trans and non-binary people are the informed minority who are manipulating the general public, the uninformed majority. Trans and non-binary people, you know, the ones who are at higher risk of being assaulted, murdered, denied health care, etc., they're actually the evil monsters in Linehan's mind. So with that, you might not be shocked to learn that Linehan is wrong about pretty much everything. Let's get into it. First of all, the game was not, in fact, invented by a student who wanted to prove his thesis that an uninformed majority will always lose a battle of information against an informed minority. Mafia was invented in 1987 by Dmitry Davidov, who was a psychology undergrad at the time in Russia. He didn't have any such thesis to test. In addition to his own studies, he was completing his junior and senior years at the same time. He was teaching an advanced psychology course to local high school students. So his actual hypothesis was, what's the easiest way to make kids waste an entire class without requiring my input and while still offering some kind of psychological lesson? Which, honestly, very relatable for anyone who's ever had to teach teenagers. The game was a smashing success in that regard. The kids he taught loved it. They wasted class time, and then they went on to travel around the world teaching the game to other people. Eventually, a programmer, writer, gamer nerd named Andrew Zarf Plotkin in New Jersey learned the game and changed it to werewolf because, in his words, werewolves are niftier, which, true, they are. So I will continue to refer to the game as werewolf from now on. So there wasn't a thesis, but does the game still prove that an uninformed majority will always lose a battle of information against an informed minority? No. If the werewolves won every game, it wouldn't be a fun game, you know? But do the werewolves usually win? Does having information that the other team doesn't give them an advantage despite their smaller number? That's where the science comes in. A lot depends upon how many total players there are and how many werewolves there are. Plotkin ran a bunch of simple simulated games to try to figure out at what point it made sense to add a third werewolf, concluding that that should happen probably around 17 players. But he points out the obvious flaw. To simulate a game, you need villagers who are very stupid and who choose a player to kill completely at random. But he did identify some interesting things. For instance, a game with an even number of players, including the moderator, favors the werewolves because an even game will always end at night, giving the werewolves an extra kill. He also found that in a two-wolf game, you would need to have 18 villagers for the villagers to have an even chance of winning, which does suggest that simply having information gives the werewolves a huge advantage. In 2006, researchers created a more advanced model that assumed the villagers played by an optimal randomized strategy, and they found that for there to be an equal chance of either team winning, the number of werewolves should equal the square root of the total number of players, meaning that in a game of 10,000 people, you would only need 50 werewolves for a fair fight. That is a tremendous advantage to simply having some information. But again, all these models must by design exclude the human factor. Using an optimal randomized method of voting for the werewolf is great and all, but it absolutely pales in comparison to good old human lie detection. I've stated in the past that humans in general are terrible at figuring out when strangers are lying. Yes, even the guys on YouTube who claim to be body language experts, they're not. But we're actually pretty good at figuring out when people we know are lying. Davidov has said that the game is meant to be played with at least 3 rounds in a row because as players take on different roles, they get better at those roles, and they also get better at observing how other players act in those roles. They get to know their fellow players better, which allows them to better sniff out the liars. That's why if you've played this game before, and I have played it a lot in my life, you'll notice that statistics be damned, the innocent villagers tend to win more often than the werewolves. All of which brings us to the psychological aspect. How do you win a game of werewolf or mafia or traders? Obviously, being a good liar helps. As a psychologist pointed out to Wired UK in 2010, lying puts a huge amount of stress on the body, especially when you're trying to fake emotion. Most people can pretend to be shocked at first, but it's very difficult to pretend to be shocked for a long time. So at some point, they might fall back to simple aggression. Looking out for switches like that or other more individualized signs of stress for each player can help you spot a lying werewolf. But there's more to it than just that. Japanese researchers examined the game logs for 431 online werewolf games, and they found that the werewolves' chances of success increased substantially the more they talked, and also the more that they secretly communicated with one another. Developing trust, whether you're a villager or a werewolf, is also an important aspect of the game. A different group of Japanese researchers used a hugging robot called Hugvy to see if it would help players win a modified version of werewolf in which everyone was actually a villager. So to win, they just had to trust each other and not kill anybody. Not only did Hugvy not increase the players' chances of winning, it actually significantly decreased their chances, meaning that hugging a robotic pillow is not an effective way to convince anyone that you are a normal, trustworthy human. One of the best ways to win seems to be making observations and keeping track of what's happening. Who's voting for whom, who succeeds in finding a werewolf, who makes a lot of accusations. The game's wiki page quotes a fan in an old CNET article saying, if the villagers are allowed to keep a pencil and paper, they always win. And that, of course, speaks to the most basic fundamental way to overcome the disadvantage: gather information. The minority has the advantage because of information, and you can overcome it by gathering information. The better you are at that, the better your observational skills and your memory, the better your chances of winning. To conclude, no, Graham Linehan was wrong about the game's origins and the proof that an informed minority will always be an uninformed majority. Not for nothing, but he's also wrong about trans and non-binary people being comparable to actual monsters killing humans in the dead of night. The game of werewolf absolutely can tell us things about human psychology and trust and behavior, but it isn't simply about an informed minority. It's an informed minority that actively seeks to harm and, in fact, destroy the uninformed majority. And it's very telling that he thinks trans and non-binary people are doing that, because he is so full of hatred for trans people, he can only see a shadowy conspiracy of people who want to harm him. Were it not for that irrational hatred, Linehan would be able to observe the world as it truly is. He would be able to see that in order to win the game, we have to trust one another, care for one another, protect one another. Because in the real world, there are no evil werewolves secretly killing in the dead of night. There are only humans, and they aren't hiding the horrible things they're doing. And if we don't vote them out, we lose. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.